Peter Wilkins, and I have many years' experience working in a form of evaluation, the performance audits conducted by the State Auditor General here in Western Australia. These look in detail at the work of government agencies, state government agencies, how they interconnect with community organisations or other parties in the community, and result in reports to Parliament. So they contribute to learning, hopefully, and improvement within the agencies, but then the important role of accountability. The other area of expertise, I suppose I'd have in terms of evaluation relates to participation in an international research group. I've had long-standing research interests around evaluation. This is a group that meets typically annually and ultimately produces books. I've done work on the quality of evaluation, contributed chapters to books, particularly a look at equity and monitoring systems for equity was a different contribution to a different book. And that then led me to get involved with the National Centre to do the summary that will be available on monitoring and evaluation. In those days, we talked about M&E when it was prepared, 2014. There's now a much stronger focus on M, E, and L, the learning that should come out of both monitoring and evaluation. I'm also deputy chair of a not-for-profit board, Australian Volunteers International. And that's where, as a board member, I look closely at the evaluation work being done by the organisation, and particularly pleased in recent times that work on Indigenous pathways for volunteers. This is Australian volunteers who could go to any of 26 countries when overseas travel is possible, and at the moment can do remote volunteering over the internet. The Indigenous Pathways program includes a particular focus on evaluation. The beginning stages of an evaluation, in a sense, are the most rewarding, but also the most challenging, trying to consider how to scope the evaluation. So always reflecting back, what's the purpose? What are you trying to achieve here? Out of that, thinking very carefully about the primary and secondary audiences and who are the beneficiaries of the evaluation becomes very important. Ultimately, and very importantly, one also needs to think very carefully about how one will engage with the parties who will be involved in the evaluation. What are the ethical considerations to ensure they have an informed consent to be involved, that one is responsive to the particular context which they're in. Considering, as I emphasised, considering early on how the findings of the evaluation will be communicated is very important. There's possibilities of using social media and video presentations, but in terms of written reports, targeting written reports to particular audiences, and the idea that one may even have more than one report can be valuable. As an example of that, I'd highlight two reports, in fact, produced by the Western Australian Auditor General. And I hasten to say these are not projects that I personally was involved in. I haven't been at that organisation for some time. But they were reports on improving Aboriginals' children's ear health, a topic which I had been interested in for some time. But the two reports, one the traditional report which goes to state parliament and is processed by parliamentary committees, meets their expectations. But the Auditor General of Western Australia at the time thought there's another whole audience out there in the Indigenous health organisations, the communities and the individuals who participated in the study, and produced a separate report which is less cumbersome, you might say, with terminology and all the detailed results, but conveys in a readable and accessible form for different audiences the main findings and the recommendations so that they can be discussed in communities as well as through the traditional report aired in the Parliament. The interesting other point that comes out of, if you look at that particular study, and that the study was scoped at the early stages around 2 questions, and it's become a practice in a number of evaluation organizations, audit offices, to try and scope the evaluation by asking a limited number, 2 to 4 perhaps, questions, which will set the scope for the whole study. In this case, the 2 questions were, and it's focused around the WA health system, has WA health helped reduce the incidence and severity of otitis media, which is glue ear basically, in Aboriginal children? So it's the contribution being made by the health system that's being looked at in that first question. And then secondarily, after some consideration, also most important to success in that area, are the various entities partnering effectively to ensure the strategies work with Aboriginal families. So you can see there are a whole lot of things that might have been of interest which fall out of scope. You could study many different things in trying to understand how it's working. But that's an example of using a limited number of questions to set the scope for the study. A couple of other points I could make still around this are, in considering how you communicate, audit officers a number of them have moved towards something you might call a newspaper style. Grab someone's attention with a headline. Then you have a lead paragraph which tells something else that's important and further draws a person in. And then you can start to work through layers of giving people more detail if they're interested. But if you've hit someone with a headline which effectively communicates something you've found or a direction you're pointing in, that will be a more likely a successful communication approach. There is an illustration of this that was developed in the United Kingdom called the dinner party technique, of testing how effective you are at communicating. And someone asks you, so what do you do during the day? And you say, well, you turn to the person, you say, well, I've been evaluating some interesting things, and by evaluating, I mean, I do a study, I collect data, I analyze the data. And the person by that stage has turned to the other side and said, so what have you been doing? And the other person talks about, well, I've just completed a study where we found that health in Aboriginal children has been improved 50% by the measures we've taken. And the person says, oh, well, what were those measures? Tell me about what you're talking about. And you go through that layered approach of giving someone additional information which draws them in. In that approach, one way of describing it is the way that newspapers typically structure their articles. The other way of thinking about it is it's essentially a storytelling approach. This is where you cover candidly what you do know, but also acknowledge the areas of lack of data, lack of knowledge, and what's not known. Sometimes this comes under the umbrella of what's called contribution analysis, pointing to the idea that whatever project or program you're involved with, you're making a contribution to change in the world out there. You're not actually the unique force at work that can change the world. So it's the contribution that you're trying to tease out. And by understanding the assumptions that you've made in your evaluation and the assumptions that are built into the project, you'll be importantly helping inform people as to what we do and don't know. It may build on things like a theory of change, which lays out the steps which will achieve the ultimate outcome, or a program logic. And both of those can draw in an understanding of the additional factors that are influencing the eventual outcome.